Welcome to Disciples in the Last Days. My name is Chris Caputo. I'm going to be your host, and sitting right beside me is Pastor Bill Rose. How are you, Bill?
Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you. All right, man. Well, here we are. We're here at our first episode here tonight, talking about disciples in the last days.
Yeah.
It's not a light subject, but
No, it's not. But I'm
not.
super excited to be doing this, and thank you for being willing to help host us.
Absolutely. So, Bill, let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about you. We'll get to how we got here tonight, but just a little bit, just so the audience gets to know you more a little bit. Tell us about that.
Reader's Digest version.
Okay.
Called to ministry a long time ago. Small argument with God. He doesn't generally make mistakes, but I was kind of convinced maybe he did that time.
Sure.
But long story short, that history has gone by so quickly. I've been doing this since 1983. I still have a passion for the King, and I have a desire to encourage, help, disciple the church. I'm still in love with the church.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the journey of the last days for you. How has that been? How have you kind of, I'm sure when you came to the Lord, you heard about the gospel. I'm sure the last days probably was maybe in the conversation at some point early on. Did that come later on for you?
Listen,
how
man,
did that work?
One of my first Bible studies,
Yeah.
with a Sunday school teacher was Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth, I think is
Okay.
what it was called.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing A Thief in the Night and being scared to death. Just a quick story.
Sure.
My mom did not work outside of the home, full-time mom.
Okay.
And I came home one day. I was a young teenager, I think, at the time, and she was always there, always greeted, always there. She was just always there, and she wasn't there, and my sister wasn't there.
Yeah.
I knew they had been raptured and I'd been left behind, and it just freaked me out, So it was kind of one of those poignant moments where it's like, you better get your act together, young man. So anyway.
Right. It's good. So then, as you have been a senior pastor, I'm sure you've seen a lot of streams in the body of Christ. Talk a little bit about some of the, in your experience, some of the directions maybe this topic can go in your experience, what you've seen.
Yeah. It seems like you get like people on odd ends of continuums.
Okay.
Back in the day, we were convinced, that we had identified the Antichrist, and, they were starting to, add up various political people's names. Or
who was it in the 80s? I don't.
Well, Henry Kissinger was one guy that came to
Okay.
mind.
All right.
And it was like, I don't know, poor Henry.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think so. And pointing fingers at different churches and movements, and,
Right.
and just odd stuff. I think has maybe made people like a little uncomfortable with the topic. And so if you're not somebody that really wants to dig in and kind of weed through the people that are on fringes and get to the people that really study the Bible, really develop a case for the return of Christ and how that might look, or the things that may precede that, or the things that are going to happen in terms of latter days, then I think it's maybe a topic that Christians sort of avoid, and they're either confused by or scared by.
Yeah. Have you run into people that are really into it? Like it's like,
Oh, dude.
yeah. Come on, bring it. What did you see? What did you see?
It's just like,
yeah.
I don't want to name names.
Yeah.
I don't
No
want to
names,
get there.
yeah.
But there are some people that I think what happens is when you start digging into this and you start realizing the Bible does honestly have a lot to say about the last days and the birth pains and what's going to happen, and you can get really in it. You can get really jazzed, and it's kind of like the book you can't put down,
Right.
And so you start
Right.
looking around, and then you start hearing some really fascinating ideas, about. You say, I never would have thought about aliens, and so you can kind of find yourself getting pulled into this a little bit, and that's not good or bad. I don't even throw that out as a caution. I just think maybe it's a stage people kind of have to work through to get to the meat
Balance,
of what God really has to say, and not living in fear, not being confused all the time, but recognizing that this is something that God has wonderfully given us, not to scare us, but
Right.
to prepare us,
Right.
and to keep a sense of maybe even urgency in the church, so that as individual Christians we recognize that it's not just, hey, we made it, we know the Lord, we got saved, we're good,
Right.
but that sense of urgency that looks around and says, man, I've got some friends I deeply care about. I have some family that I'm really concerned about. I have some neighbors that I'm building relationships with. And it's like, I want to make sure I keep that sharp focus of sharing my faith as a part of those conversations, not because they're projects, but because they're people that I genuinely care about.
I love what you're saying. It's almost keeping your edge, staying current with it, but also being a human being functioning normally, functioning whatever normal means, right?
What that means.
Guys like us, right? Yeah. But so like it, I know for me, the journey's been very interesting with the last days because in the beginning it was something that I could not get enough of, and then it was a subject that I did not really want to embrace too much because I had my day ins and day outs, and yes, that'll be here at some point.
Right.
And then it's been interesting in the last season. A lot more things have been happening lately that we're gonna dive into a little bit tonight.
Right.
But also, it's interesting. It's almost like a setup. I mean, I'm not going to speak for God on this, but I know there's weariness in the camp. I know and that sometimes can lead us to just kind of be hard-hearted towards it, or just dull, or whatever. Have you had any kind of run-ins with that kind of an experience?
And I kind of, maybe we can get into this just a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
let's do it.
I think the Christian community, and I'm talking about North America, because it's I don't want to speak for people internationally because I'm not under the circumstances they are, and I'm not under the fire that some of them are.
Right, it's a good point.
When people talk about, it's like, well, what about the tribulation? I'm like, have you read about some of our brothers and sisters abroad, because they're
Heard about the
experiencing
underground
it. It's
church
like,
and all that
hey,
stuff. Yep.
But I think the church in North America now, I think because we feel like we have been battling so much in the culture for so long, that there's a fatigue that sets in.
Sure.
And I think what happens with that, if I might,
Sure.
it almost brings us to the point of, it's almost like the spirit of Laodicea, because you're worn out. It's not. It may not be because you don't care. It just may be because you're fatigued. You're kind of like the parent that's repeated themselves so many times, and there's been no response, from your child, and at some point you just kind of like, well, what's the point?
Right.
And I wonder sometimes if Christians aren't more fatigued than they are anything.
But you talk about, that's good. Let's go down that rabbit trail a little bit. Laodicea, and just for those watching tonight, or maybe this may be a new concept for them. Talk more about that Laodicea and lay a little foundation on that.
Yeah, kind of thinking this thing out a little bit. One of the things that we kind of talk about with this idea of being disciples in the last days, if you will, kind of what are the implications of that? What does that mean? What does that mean to you as an individual Christian? What does that mean for your family? What does that mean for your church or whatever? So I've developed a theory maybe, or just some thoughts around this. But in Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, there are letters to the 7 churches at that time. And maybe as we get into some of the later episodes, we can kind of talk some of this out a little bit. But in chapter 3, the letter to the church of Laodicea is given to us there. And in verses 15 through 18, we end up with a church that ultimately doesn't need Christ to accomplish what they're doing.
Interesting.
Yeah, so much so that Christ pictures himself outside of the church knocking. But when you read it, it's a fascinating read. He says, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone opens the door, I will come in, right? And so he's talking now to the individual Christian, and it leads me to believe that he may not be talking to that church even so much as a whole at that moment in the conversation, that moment in the letter, that line, that statement, because maybe the church as a whole that he's speaking to won't respond anymore. And maybe he's talking to the individuals in that church, and he's saying, hey, I'm knocking on your door. And I know you're a part of a church or a movement or whatever group this is that he's speaking to specifically.
Right.
That has kind of lost faith. And they're going through the motions, they're doing religion pretty well, but the connection, the power, the joy, the peace, those things, they don't know about that anymore.
Right.
But I'm inviting you
Right.
to be a part, and for me and you to sit down and to fellowship, and for you to experience that. And so that's kind of where I roll out, you know, as we think about this spirit of Laodicea.
Yeah.
And I think the church in the West we're fighting that. It's not the only thing that we're fighting, but it's a thing that we're fighting.
Almost what comes to me is, can you even hear the knock on the door?
Yeah.
Can you even hear
and,
it?
And if you do, you know, if you're sitting on the couch with the remote, you know, do you want to get up?
Bill!
Yeah, it's like, hey, we're good. You know, I'm fine. And he says that to that church. He says, you know, you think everything's okay. You think you have everything. You think you can see. You think you're, you know, but I tell you, you know, he sees he has a very different perspective than they do.
Okay, here's the one of the $64,000 questions tonight.
All right.
Why are we in the last days? Why, after we just covered that as a context,
Right.
Why now? Why this? Why are we here tonight? Why?
Okay, so we've like I said, I'm a full-time pastor. That's my day job.
Right.
And so as I've gotten into some of these studies, we've done some just short series
Sure.
in our church and our ministry. And we've had to dig into this, and we've had to take a look at this. And, you know, the more that you read, the more that you look, the more that you study, the more that you realize that so much of what the Bible has already talked about has taken place, and it's set us up. You know, years ago, you know, some of the things that you and I take for granted today, you know, my grandfather, you know, when he was in ministry and doing his thing, wouldn't have had context for. For instance, in 1948, Israel became a nation again.
Right.
Up to that point,
Right.
what did you do with the prophecies, you know, around this that kind of sounded like that? And so a lot of people were like, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just sort of push the church into that slot, and we let them be the new Israel, if you will. And then in 1948, Israel becomes a nation in one day, just as the prophet foretold. And here they are today, still a nation, and all these things taking place. Jesus talks about all these signs, these birth pains, if you will.
Sure.
Rebecca, my wife, and I have 4 children, and so I've been a part of every one of those deliveries, and you know the birth pains and the contractions. And I'm looking at my world right now, and I'm like, they're getting closer together, and they're getting more intense, and the things that are happening. I don't know how you don't look around and wonder what's going on, and wonder where things are headed. Even if you are marginally religious, I think you have to look around and have a deep concern about the future of our world, and if you're a parent or a grandparent, the future of the next generations.
Okay, so let's flesh this out a little bit. So now we're in late September 2017.
Right.
What has been some of the new insights, some of the new data, some of the new trends that are happening right now, either that you've landed on, or maybe some things that you're struggling with, that's kind of new to the scene? Maybe not a struggle, but more of like, wow, Lord, 5 years ago, that wouldn't even been on my radar screen, for example. Or if there's anything, 1 or 2 things maybe you want to just kind of throw out there to the audience. And
So you end up with some extreme conversations with this. So we've been going through, some of our listeners might recognize September 23rd. There were people talking about this could be the rapture,
Right.
you know, because of this Virgo prophecy that's taken out of Revelation chapter 12, and you know the constellations and the various alignments and the things that were happening. You're like, oh, that, you know, and Jesus said there would be signs, and boy, here we have this, and now the constellations are doing that, and September 23rd came and went. And I think, so you get these extreme conversations of people saying, well, the rapture is going to take place, or the second coming is going to take place, and you know, it's right there on top of us. When the reality is, Jesus says there will be signs in the sky.
Right.
You know, there will be earthquakes. There will be there will be these things that happen in nature. Those are the things that I look at. And some people, again, you kind of get this fringe kind of thing going. It's like, well, it's judgment against this nation or that nation, and I'm like, it's what he said would happen as the birth pains of where things are going.
Right.
Even creation is groaning for redemption, we're told in the Word.
Right.
And it almost makes me wonder if the evil one, the prince of power of the air, is ramping everything up, and creation groans for the King to return and restore it.
Yes. Do you believe that discipleship in the last days will face different challenges than times previous throughout history?
Yeah, disciples in the last days, I do think are going to have some unique challenges, and in some ways.
Yeah.
Let me preface it that way.
Sure.
I think the ready access of information in the wrong hands, the ability to see into people's lives in the way that people can have happen. I mean, we just had the big Experian deal, where data,
mean like little cameras on our
yeah,
phones right
little
there kind
cameras
of
on the
thing?
phone,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
this
yeah.
kind of stuff, and I go, in the wrong hands, that could really go a direction that's not good, that's not helpful.
Yes.
So I see that kind of a thread, and I don't really know where all to go with that. But the point simply is it could go wrong. Additionally, I think people in the West, when they think of persecution, maybe have a very different perspective than people that live in other parts of the world right now. It's very easy for us to think about persecution as something that did happen. It happened in the first century church. It happened throughout history with things like the Holocaust and various leaders that obviously had some very evil intent. Or we tend to think about it as something that does happen today, but it tends to happen in other countries. And so we have this kind of this distance that we feel with it. But I think maybe we see persecution of a different sort. For instance, there's a big war of words right now, right? Language is a really big thing, and so we, for the better or the worse, sometimes we talk about political correctness and these kinds of things. Now, on the positive side, there is some importance in creating an awareness that things that shouldn't be said, either because they're so offensive or they carry maybe so much historical baggage that's hurtful and detrimental, etc. But these kinds of things can have unintended and or perhaps intended consequence, right? So we think about that, and we think about, well, we need to have corrective action when somebody's speaking in a hateful way, and so maybe we should criminalize certain words, phrases, terms, etc.
Sure.
But then the question begins to roll around in my mind, and I'm thinking, well, how are we going to define that? And who ultimately will define it, right? And then I begin to think about it from the perspective of a pastor or you as an individual Christ follower, and I think, well, if you or I quote or speak something out of the Bible that presents a stance that is opposite the values of our culture, are we participating at that point in hate speech?
Sure.
Right? Or can a private business be forced to provide a service that provides or that would violate their biblical worldview? So, Chris, here's kind of where I roll out on this.
Okay.
At the end of the day, in the West, I don't think we'll call it persecution. I think we'll call it law enforcement.
Let me ask you this, Bill. You've been pastoring, discipling for 30 plus years. You have a model that you were trained in, you rolled out in.
Right.
And you don't have to keep this, you may not have to share your personal experience right now, because maybe you're still working it through right now, but kind of looking at it clinically, what are some of the challenges you think ministries are going to have to face or have to readjust? What are you seeing? We don't have to talk right here at home, just in the landscape, even where we live here in South Johnson County. Where do you see some of the challenges coming, that they were doing it this way, now here's the when you're leading your people, when you're pastoring the assignment that the Lord's given to you?
I think as Christians and ministries, I think we're going to have to re-engage the culture, and
That's good.
I think we're going to have to regain our voice. One of my big concerns is that oftentimes when people hear the quote unquote church, they're hearing a voice that's not helpful or may not represent you or I very well.
Right.
And so what happens is people end up hearing a voice that sounds very harsh.
Right.
Or it sounds almost like somebody's happy, that you're on your way to hell or something, versus having a redemptive graciousness to it. Right. And I think churches that are going to stay engaged in the culture and that are going to make a difference are going to have to think about the voice that we want to have and the tone of that voice and the tenor of that voice and the purpose of that voice so that people don't just hear maybe something that we're against because we think the Bible speaks specifically to it, but they want to hear what we're for, and they want to hear how we're a part of a greater solution, and they want to hear how there's a redemptive nature to what we are trying to do and accomplish. We want to see healthy families. We want to see young people, kids, teens, we want to see them thrive and succeed and be everything that they could possibly be. And I think the Christians, the church, big C, if you will, has pieces and parts of that we bring to the table. We don't bring everything. We don't have all the truth of every topic that we need to get into, with and for people, but we bring some important components to it. And there is a voice that we need to regain.
I'm almost thinking of discipleship you're saying in a Laodicean culture, American culture. We do our best. We share our gospel, the good news with Christ. We are confessing, repenting. We're doing our best to make those small, minor transformations along the way. God breaks in. There's those seasons of toughness. There's those principle-based teachings that we share with as leaders in the body of Christ, trying to help people along to learn the Word, right? And then there's that almost that little twist of, okay, well, if we really are in the last, there's almost a numbering of your days. There's almost like a, wait. There's that almost this conviction, not a bad conviction. There's like this conviction of, oh, wait, okay.
It's like this holy
It's like preparing
push.
for war. It's like when you train for war versus training for peacetime, it's different, right? It's
right.
almost like there's a difference in the way that boot camps run, but not out of the world system and how the military does it, but God's army. How does that look? How does that flesh out? I'm just bantering with you a little bit about just some things that I think about. Like if there's a raft going down the river and I know there's a falls at the end of that thing, man, there's a way I'm going to ride that raft. It's going to be a little bit different than if I'm just cruising down the river and letting the sun, and you and I are having a couple waters and sodas and all that good stuff, right? So, okay, well, let's see. What does this mean for me as a believer as well as my family? You touched on that a little bit. Disciples in the last day. What does that mean for Impact Fellowship and Bill Rose and the congregation?
Right. I think for me, as an individual Christian, it's really staying on those basics. Okay. I'm an ardent believer, in being in the gym, and there are a lot of crazy workouts and diets and all kinds of stuff that people do, but at the end of the day, it's like there's some basics. Do the basics, build the foundation, fundamentals, Yep. And I think as individual Christians, those spiritual disciplines still matter.
That's right.
Digging into God's Word, not just to read it and check it off, hey, I did my deal, I did my God duty today,
right.
or just praying, Lord bless this bunch as we munch our lunch, kind of. It's not that, it's not that kind of stuff,
Nice.
But digging into the Word and meditating on it and letting it seep into your soul a little bit and let it seep into your relationships and let it seep into your work ethics and your integrity and all those kinds of things, because God really does have a lot to say that's super helpful in every aspect of our life. So I think that's a key component for me. I think the other thing is staying really engaged. As I said, we have 4 children. Now we have 6 grandchildren. Mm-hmm. We'll see how many we end up with, in the total.
Or hours for the quiver.
Yeah, I was like, whatever. Yeah, more gifts at Christmas. But really taking serious my role as a dad, my role as a grandfather, in discipling, my kids, my grandkids, so that they know Christ, and there's a reliance on Him and His gift of grace, and there's a spiritual dynamic alive in their life, where the Holy Spirit is empowering them to live their faith out,
Right.
and to do so in a way that's really very real and very relevant.
Well, Bill, I really enjoyed our conversation tonight. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed your heart for the disciples in the last days, and I look forward to see what God does with all this and where we're going. And thank you so much for watching this tonight. I hope it has blessed all of you out there tonight. And on behalf of Pastor Bill, my name is Chris Caputo, and this is Disciple in the Last Days.